With so much of our personal data flowing through the internet today, it has become imperative that we secure it from prying eyes. We have taken a look at how encryption works and its importance in today's world. If you haven't seen that video yet, we recommend giving it a view before moving further, the link of which you can find in the description. In our last video, we saw how the data encryption standard, also known as DES, became the global standard for encryption and data security. Eventually, with so much computing power growth, the need for a stronger algorithm was necessary to safeguard our personal data. As solid as DES was, the computers of today could easily break the encryption with repeated attempts, thereby rendering the data security helpless. To counter this dilemma, a new standard was introduced which was termed as the Advanced Encryption Standard or the AES algorithm. Let's learn what is Advanced Encryption Standard. The AES algorithm, also known as the Rijndael algorithm, is a symmetric block cipher with a block size of 128 bits. It is converted into ciphertext using keys of 128, 192, or 256 bits. It is implemented in software and hardware throughout the world to encrypt sensitive data. The National Institute of Standards and Technology, also known as NIST, started development on AES in 1997 when it was announced the need for an alternative to the data encryption standard. The new internet needed a replacement for DES because of its small key size. With increasing computing power, it was considered unsafe against entire key search attacks. The triple DES was designed to overcome this problem. However, it was deemed to be too slow to be deployed in machines worldwide. Strong cases were present by the Mars, RC6, Serpent, and the Two-Fish algorithms, but it was the Rijndael encryption algorithm, also known as AES, which was eventually chosen as the standard symmetric key encryption algorithm to be used. Its selection was formalized with the release of Federal Information Processing Standards Publication 197 in the November of 2001. It was approved by the US Secretary of Commerce. Now that we understand the origin of AES, let us have a look at the features that make AES encryption algorithm unique. The AES algorithm uses a substitution permutation or SP network. It consists of multiple rounds to produce a ciphertext. It has a series of linked operations, including replacing inputs with specific outputs, that is substitutions, and others that involve bit shuffling, which is permutations. At the beginning of the encryption process, we only start out with a single key, which can be either a 128-bit key, a 192-bit key, or a 256-bit key. Eventually, this one key is expanded to be used in multiple rounds throughout the encryption and the decryption cycle. Interestingly, AES performs all its calculations on byte data instead of bit data, as seen in the case of the DES algorithm. Therefore, AES treats 128 bits of a clear text block as 16 bytes. The number of rounds during the encryption process depends on the key size that is being used. The 128-bit key size fixes 10 rounds, the 192-bit key size fixes 12 rounds, and the 256-bit key holds 14 rounds. A round key is required for each of these rounds, but since only one key is input into the algorithm, the single key needs to be expanded to get the key for each round, including the round 0. Let's take a look at the applications of AES in this world. AES finds most use in the area of wireless security in order to establish a secure mode of authentication between routers and clients. Highly secure mechanisms like WPA and WPA2 are extensively used in securing Wi-Fi endpoints with the help of Rijndael's algorithm. It also helps in SSL TLS encryption that is instrumental in encrypting our internet browser sessions. AES works in tandem with other asymmetric encryption algorithms to make sure the web browser and web server are properly configured and use encrypted channels for communication. AES is also prevalent in general file encryption of various formats, ranging from critical documents to the media files. Having a large key allows people to encrypt media and decrypt data with maximum security possible. AES is also used for processor security in hardware appliances to prevent machine hijacking, among other things.
With so much of our personal data flowing through the internet today, it has become imperative that we secure it from prying eyes. We have taken a look at how encryption works and its importance in today's world. If you haven't seen the video yet, we recommend you giving it a view before moving further, the link of which you can find in the description. We discussed how we can use certain keys to encrypt information so that unauthorized parties cannot read our data. But what can we do with those keys? They are passed along with the raw data through a cipher. There are some steps we follow in order to scramble the data so that it become unreadable. These steps can also be called encryption algorithms. And today we are going to learn one of the oldest encryption standard, the data encryption standard, or DES in short. DES algorithm stands for Data Encryption Standard. It is a symmetric key cipher that is used to encrypt and decrypt information in a block-by-block manner. Each block is encrypted individually and they are later chained together to form our final ciphertext, which is then sent to a receiver.
DES takes the original unaltered piece of data called the plain text in a 64-bit block
and it is converted into an encrypted text that is called the ciphertext. It uses 48-bit keys during the encryption process and follows a specific structure called the Fistel cipher structure during the entire process. It is a symmetric key algorithm, which means DES can reuse the keys used in the encryption format to decrypt the ciphertext back to the original plain text. Once the 64-bit blocks are encrypted, they can be combined together before being transmitted. In the cipher, we can use the following image as a reference. The block being encrypted is divided into two parts, one of which is being passed on to the function, while the other part is XORed with the function's output. The function also uses the encryption key that differs for each individual round. This keeps going on until the last step, until where the right-hand side and the left-hand side are being swapped. Here we receive our final ciphertext. For the decryption process, the entire procedure is reversed, starting from the order of the keys to the block sorting. If the entire process is repeated in a reverse order, we will eventually get back our plain text, and this simplicity helps the speed. Overall, this was later detrimental to the efficiency of the algorithm, hence the security was compromised. A Fistel block cipher is a structure used to derive many symmetric block ciphers such as DES, which as we have discussed in our previous comment. Fistel cipher proposed a structure that implements substitution and permutation alternately so that we can obtain ciphertext from the plain text and vice versa. This helps in reducing the redundancy of the program and increases the complexity to combat brute force attacks. The Fistel cipher is actually based on the Shannon structure that was proposed in 1945. The Fistel cipher is the structure suggested by Horst Feistel, which was considered to be a backbone while developing many symmetric block ciphers. The Shannon structure highlights the implementation of alternate confusion and diffusion. And like we already discussed, the Fistel cipher structure can be completely reversed depending on the data. However, we must consider the fact that to decrypt the information by reversing the Fistel structure, we will need the exact polynomial functions and the key orders. To understand how the blocks are being calculated, we take a plain text which is of 64-bit and that is later divided into two equal halves of 32-bit each. In this, the right half is immediately transferred to the next round to become the new left half of the second round. The right hand is again passed off to a function which uses an encryption key that is unique to each round in the Fistel cipher. Whatever the function gives off as an output, it is passed on as an XOR input with the left half of the initial plain text. The next output will become the right half of the second round for the plain text. This entire process constitutes of a single round in the Fistel cipher. Taking into account what happens in the polynomial function, we take one half of the block and pass it through an expansion box. The work of the expansion box is to increase the size of the half from 32-bit to 48-bit text. This is done to make the text compatible to a 48-bit keys we have generated beforehand. Once we pass it through the XOR function, we get a 48-bit text as an output. Now remember, a half should be of 32-bit. So this 48-bit output is then later passed on to a substitution box. This substitution box reduces its size from 48-bit to 32-bit output, which is then later XORed with the first half of the plain text. A block cipher is considered the safest if the size of the block is large. but large block sizes can also slow down encryption speed and the decryption speed. Generally, the size is 64-bit. Sometimes modern block ciphers like AES have a 128-bit block size as well. The security of the block cipher increases with increasing key size, but larger key sizes may also reduce the speeds of the process. Earlier, 64-bit keys were considered sufficient. Modern ciphers need to use 128-bit keys due to the increasing complexity of today's computational standards. The increasing number of rounds also increase the security of the block cipher. Similarly, they are inversely proportional to the speed of encryption. A highly complex round function enhances the security of the block cipher. Albeit, we must maintain a balance between the speed and security. The symmetric block cipher is implemented in a software application to achieve better execution speed. There is no use of an algorithm if it cannot be implemented in a real-life framework that can help organizations to encrypt or decrypt the data in a timely manner. Now that we understand the basics of Fistel ciphers, we can take a look at how DES manages to run through 16 rounds of this structure and provide the ciphertext at the end. Now that we understand the basics of Fistel ciphers, we can take a look at how DES manages to run through 16 rounds of this structure and provide a ciphertext. In simple terms, DES takes the 64-bit plaintext and converts it into a 64-bit ciphertext. And since we are talking about asymmetric algorithms, the same key is being used when it is decrypting the data as well. We first take a 64-bit key plaintext and we pass it through an initial permutation function. The initial permutation function has the job of dividing the block into two different parts so that we can perform Fistel cipher structures on it. There are multiple rounds being procured in the DES algorithm, namely 16 rounds of Fistel cipher structure. Each of these rounds will need keys. Initially, we take a 56-bit cipher key, but it is a single key. We pass it on to a round key generators, which generates 16 different keys for each single round that the Fistel cipher is being run. These keys are passed on to the rounds as 48 bits. The size of these 48 bits keys is the reason we use the substitution and permutation bonds in the polynomial functions of the Fistel ciphers. When passing through all these rounds, we reach round 16, where the final key is passed on from the round key generator, and we get a final permutation. In the final permutation, the rounds are swapped, and we get a final ciphertext. This is the entire process of DES with 16 rounds of Fistel ciphers encompassed in it. To decrypt a ciphertext back to the plaintext, we just have to reverse the process we did in the DES algorithm and reverse the key order along with the functions. This kind of simplicity is what gave DES the bonus when it comes to speed, but eventually it was detrimental to the overall efficiency of the program when it comes to security factors. DES have 5 different modes of operation to choose from. One of those is electronic codebook. Each 64-bit block is encrypted and decrypted independently in the electronic codebook format. We also have cipher block chaining, or the CBC method. Here, each 64-bit block depends on the previous one, and all of them use an initialization vector. We have a cipher feedback block mechanism where the preceding ciphertext becomes the input for the encryption algorithm. It produces a pseudo-random output, which in turn is XORed with the plaintext. There is an output feedback method as well, which is the same as cipher feedback, except that the encryption algorithm input is the output from the preceding DES. A counter method has a different way of approach, where each plaintext block is XORed with an encrypted counter. The counter is then incremented for each subsequent block. There are a few other alternatives to these modes of operation, but the 5 mentioned above are the most widely used in the industry and recommended by cryptographers worldwide.
Digital signatures have become a part and parcel of the everyday correspondence in the corporate sector. The pandemic has further accelerated the need for digital wares to become mainstream in the business world. While we have already learned regarding the DSA algorithm, which is exclusively used for verification and transmission of signatures, the RSA algorithm can be used for general data encryption and decryption as well. Let's take a look at what asymmetric encryption is. Asymmetric encryption uses a double layer of protection. There are two different keys in play here, a private key and a public key. The public key is used to encrypt the information pre-transit, and the private key is used to decrypt the data post-transit. This pair of keys must belong to the receiver of the message. The public keys can then be shared via messaging, blog posts, key servers, and there are no restrictions for it. As you can see in this image, two keys are working in this system. The sender first encrypts the message using the receiver's private key, after which we receive the ciphertext. The ciphertext is then transmitted to the receiver without any other key. On getting the ciphertext, the receiver uses his private key to decrypt the ciphertext and get the plain text back. There has been no requirement of any key exchange throughout this process, therefore solving the most glaring flaw faced in symmetric key cryptography. The public key known to everyone cannot be used to decrypt messages, and the private key which is known to everyone cannot decrypt messages. It doesn't need to be shared with anyone. The sender and receiver can exchange personal data using the same set of keys for as often as possible. In the current scenario, if we have two people, Mary and Roy, who wants to send messages to each other, Mary must use Roy's public key to encrypt the information before passing on the ciphertext to Roy. On receiving the ciphertext, Roy can use his private key to decrypt the data and get the plain text back. Like we highlighted earlier, both the keys belong to Roy, who is the receiver in this particular interaction. The RSA algorithm is a public key signature algorithm developed by Ron Rivest, Adi Shamir, and Leonard Edelman. Their paper was first published in 1977, and the algorithm uses logarithmic functions to keep the working complex enough to withstand brute force and streamlined enough to be fast post-deployment. RSA can also encrypt and decrypt general information to securely exchange data along with handling digital signature verification. Let us understand how it achieves this. We take our plaintext message M. We pass it through a hash function to generate the digest H, which is then encrypted using the sender's private key. This is appended to the original plaintext message and sent over to the receiver. Once the receiver receives the bundle, we can pass the plaintext message to the same hash function to generate a digest, and the ciphertext can be decrypted using the public key of the sender. The remaining hashes are compared. If the values match, then the data integrity is verified and the sender is authenticated. Apart from digital signatures, the main case of RSA is encryption and decryption of private information before being transmitted across communication channel. This is where the data encryption comes into play. When using RSA for encryption and decryption of general data, it reverses the key set usage. Unlike signature verification, it receives the receiver's public key to encrypt the data and uses the receiver's private key in decrypting the data. Thus, there is no need to exchange any keys in this scenario. There are two broad components when it comes to RSA cryptography. One of them is key generation. Key generation employs a step of generating the private and the public keys that are going to be used for encrypting and decrypting the data. The second part is the encryption and decryption functions. These are the ciphers and steps that need to be run when scrambling the data or recovering the data from the ciphertext. Now look at the factors that make the RSA algorithm stand out versus its competitors in the advantageous topics of this lesson. RSA encryption depends on using the receiver's public key so that you don't have to share any secret key to receive the messages from others. This was the most glaring flaw faced by symmetric algorithms, which were eventually fixed by asymmetric cryptography structure. Since the key pairs are related to each other, a receiver cannot intercept the message since they don't have the correct private keys to decrypt the information. If a public key can decrypt the information, the sender cannot refuse signing it with his private key without admitting the private key is not in fact private anymore. The encryption process is faster than that of the DSA algorithm. Even if the key generation is slower in RSA, many systems across the world tend to reuse the same keys so that they can spend less time in key generation and more time on actual ciphertext management. Data will be tamper-proof in transit since meddling with the data will alter the usage of the keys. The private key won't be able to decrypt the information, hence alerting the receiver of any kind of manipulation in between. The receiver must be aware of any third party who possesses the private key, since they can alter the data mid-transit, the cases of which are rather low. Hope you learned something interesting today. If you have any questions regarding this topic, feel free to ask us in the comments below and we will be happy to answer your question. Thank you for watching.
Hi there, if you like this video, subscribe to the Simplilearn YouTube channel and click here to watch similar videos. To nerd up and get certified, click here.